our Facebook and our Instagram and our Facebook pages. So look for it there. I think that is all I had. So without further ado, I'm going to pass this off to Ryan.
Thanks. And maybe I'll close the poll and hopefully it will then show the results of what everybody submitted. And there. So as would be expected, walking and hiking are leading the list of how people are enjoying the outdoors these days, but a few swimmers as well. It's certainly desirable with the heat we've been having. Paddlers and bikers, and then one brave soul willing to admit that they're a forest bather. But considering so many of the other activities probably fall under that umbrella, we're all forest bathers. All right, well, I will take that down and we'll get started. So we first developed this, so I first developed this virtual tour of the Porcupine Falls Trail, the Calhoun Family Forest, for an event that we did, gosh, over a month ago with the Keene Chamber of Commerce. And I just kind of threw together some pictures on a Saturday that I had taken with my family on a visit to the trail. And it ended up making for a really nice way for people to see this property. I think an event like this, a virtual tour like this, can serve a number of purposes. For some of you, it might be an introduction to the property that you haven't visited yet, and hopefully this will compel you to go out and check it out. And we can point you to directions and information on our website and how to get there, maybe at the end. For others, though, you know, it may be that hiking a trail just isn't possible anymore right now. And so we hope to do the best we can to give you as much of a virtual experience of the trail as we can. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll get going. All right. So there is, hang on, get my multiple monitors organized. There we go. So the John and Rosemary Calhoun Family Forest is in Gilsum, just off of Route 10 on White Brook Road. Some of you may have crossed paths with some of the different Calhoun family members in the area, or maybe you even knew John or Rosemary back in the day. John Calhoun was a very prominent consulting forester in the Monadnock region. One of his claims to fame was not only did he help people manage their forests, but he also directed a lot of people to make the decision to conserve their land with a land trust. And so he's got quite a legacy, not only in his own work, but in all the conservation that happened. And when he died, his 5 children, one of whom is Jack Calhoun, some of you may know, in Harrisville, decided that rather than try to share the family, their family's forest among the 5 of them, which is sometimes challenging, that they wanted to donate it to the Monadnock Conservancy. There were 2 conditions. One, that the property always needed to be open for public access, and the other, that it always needed to be managed, at least in part, as a working forest. So on this property, not only do we have a wonderful trail system that's growing, but we also manage it for wood products on a sustainable basis. And we're proud to do that, and we're proud to demonstrate how forest management can, in many cases, be really complementary with forest conservation. So when you visit the property, this is one of the first things you see after you drive up White Brook Road and drive and drive and drive and wonder if you're actually going to get there, but then this sign finally welcomes you. And you know you've reached the parking area because you get to a gate. And by the way, you're going to see lots of images of my son, Henry, who was my tour guide on the day out that we took pictures for this virtual tour. So this gate marks the end of White Brook Road, and after that it's completely private. But we have next to it, a nice little parking area that can accommodate a number of cars quite safely and comfortably. And most days you can find a parking spot just fine. Across from the parking lot is the start of the trail. And one of our proudest elements of this Porcupine Falls Trail is the stonework, not only at this bridge, but in some other locations that you'll see further on. And this stonework and at other locations on the trail was all built by a group of volunteer trail artisans known as the Jolly Rovers, who are based in New York State. And we're very grateful for the work that they put into this many years ago. The Porcupine Falls Trail is really intended to be on the easier end of the spectrum of hikes in the region. As you'll see, it's actually quite short, can be done as a simple loop. And though there are some steps, we've really intended it to be not terribly strenuous and therefore accessible to as many people as possible. So once you climb up the steps and cross over the bridge, you can look down and see White Brook passing underneath you. And in this area are some neat old glacial potholes, depressions in the rock carved out by eons of water and erosion and swirling sediment that is drilled down into some really neat shapes in the rock. The other end of the bridge is the trail kiosk. We call this kind of the Cadillac of all trail kiosks. It was built by one of the Calhoun children, who's a high-end builder. And I don't think I've ever seen a kiosk before with standing seam roof at a trailhead, but it's really quite beautiful. And we try to switch out different interpretive information and historical information in the display there. There's another welcome sign there telling us a little bit more about the Monadnock Conservancy and some of the very few rules of the property. And then to follow the trail, it's marked with blue blazes, and off we go. These photos were taken in early summer, so you'll probably see that it's more spring-like in these photos than it is now. And along the way, I love to point out on any hike, in person or virtual, some of the natural history along the trail. This is Indian cucumber, a relatively common forest plant that has a root down just below the surface of the soil that is bright white and can be dug up with your finger, and you brush off the dirt and take a bite into it, and it tastes exactly like a cucumber, even though it has it's not at all related to a cucumber at all. And then here's Henry peeking through a really neat crevice in the trees. And if you take a step back to figure out what's going on here, see that this is just one of my favorite trees in the property. It's two red maple stems that share a trunk at the base, but then kind of wind themselves together as they climb up to the canopy. That day, we found a little treasure that someone had left on the side of the trail. I've been finding these things all over the region lately. I think little expressions of goodwill during an otherwise troubling time. And so this one was out there on that day. It was a special treat. So when we continue along the trail, we follow through gentle woods. This is gold thread. The flower and the deeper green colored leaves. Gold thread has medicinal qualities, at least it's been traditionally used for that. Tinctures of it are believed to help ease mouth sores. I also read recently that it can help in treatment of alcoholism and suppressing cravings for alcohol. I'd never heard that one before. It's so named because its root is bright yellow, almost gold, and so it's named gold thread. And then there's also some Canada Mayflower near the top of the picture. This time of the year, of course, the ferns were still opening up. This was probably a cinnamon fern along the side of the trail. some striped maple as well, one of my favorites of the 5 or so maples found typically in this region. This is another one I love to stop and talk about, and maybe I'll get some audience participation here. So this is a white pine tree, but it is quite different from any of the other white pine trees growing around it in the forest. For one, it's bigger, but it also has these very complicated and multiple branching trunks growing partway up. And I'm curious if anybody wants to volunteer to explain why this tree grew that way and how it's different from the other white pines around it. Anyone want to hazard a guess? I'm sure some of you actually know the answer, but feel free to unmute yourself and toss out a... No?
If you need a volunteer, I'll jump in.
Sure, Phil.
I would call it a pasture pine, typically.
Yeah.
A large pine that came into a clearing, probably with other pines, with a cohort of young pine trees. And that is probably why it has multiple stems. Pines, when they come in with a lot of light, tend to have a weevil that chews off the top part of the tree when they're starting to grow. And they have multiple stems that come up because of that. So, so this tree, for whatever reason, was let go while the other ones either were cut or fell, and ultimately became probably a nice shade tree for sheep in the area, I would guess. And it was multiple stems and has been there a long time, obviously. That would be my guess. Old pine is another name.
Just a random guess. Phil's right. Yeah, this would be a pasture pine. Some people call them wolf pines because it's sort of like a lone wolf. It stands apart from the others. And Phil's right. It got its start in a pasture, which this property and the vast majority of the acreage in this region was, if you go far enough back, pasture for livestock. And when white pines are grown in open sun like that in a pasture, they're susceptible to this weevil that kills off the growing leader tip of the tree, and the side branches then take over. And as that happens repeatedly, you get this multiple trunking. White pines that grow up amidst an established canopy of forest in smaller openings that don't have that bright sun are less susceptible to that weevil, and so that's why the younger pines surrounding this pine are all pretty straight and don't have this multiple trunking. So be on the lookout. There are these wolf pines everywhere in the region. A little further along the trail are other signs of past human use of this property. Stone walls. I'm sure we've all seen stone walls throughout the Monadnock region and throughout New England. Legacy of agriculture in this region. A lot of people believe that these walls were primarily built when stones were picked out of the fields in preparation for planting, which in some places is true, but in most cases that was not the rationale for making these walls out of stone. Very little, if any of you are gardeners outside the river valley, you know that the ground is always happy to serve up a supply of stones year after year. And so very little of this region was actually managed for cultivated crops. And because it was so rocky, rather, most of the walls around here were built out of stone out of necessity because there just wasn't enough wood to make fences. And stone was the best thing they had. And when there was a huge boom of sheep farming to supply the woolens industry, everybody needed to build walls to keep their sheep in. And so they built them of stone. And they looked better in their heyday, and through the action of frost and the ground shifting, they've tumbled in most areas over time, but we still see them. So we continue along the trail, following the blue marks, and come to a little boardwalk across a wet area that if you walked across it right now, you'd wonder why it was there, because I'm sure it's just about bone dry underneath, but in the springtime, it can be quite wet. This boardwalk is built of black locust lumber, which the old timers will say lasts about 1 day longer than stone. It's highly rot resistant wood, and a little more expensive, harder to work with, not really good on tools, harder to find, but saves a lot of money and time in having to rebuild trail infrastructure if you can make it out of that. We come to another stone staircase up a short incline here. And pretty soon you can start to hear the falls around the corner and then catch a glimpse of the falls as well as you crest a little hill. And as you approach the falls, you see another bridge across White Brook. This one is brand new, replaced one that's had worn out earlier this spring. And you've reached the falls, and it's always nice to take your time around the falls and explore and take in the view, because there's so much to see. And Henry and I will show you around some of his favorite places. So more stonework all around the falls to prevent erosion on steeper dirt slopes. There is, in fact, a stone couch that the Jolly Rovers built just adjacent to the bridge, with a big flat stone to sit on and one to lean back on behind you. A member of the staff of the Conservancy has built an Aldo Leopold bench. This was a design of Aldo Leopold, who is one of the very first American conservationists, author of the Sand County Almanac, which some of you may have read, may be familiar with, but certainly a legend in conservation and an inspiration for many of us. And the area of the falls is really just kind of magical. It's like this little grotto. The brook here is really kind of braided and goes around the trees and over rocks all around you. It's especially exciting after a hard rain or in the spring when there's a lot of water flowing through the brook. So you get closer to the falls, you see that it's tumbling down through a cleft in the rock and the ledge right in front of you. And you get closer, you can see where it splashes down, and maybe get close enough to cool off right under it if you want. Porcupine Falls is named Porcupine Falls because it's great porcupine habitat in this area, with lots of ledges and crevices in rock, lots of hemlock, one of their favorite foods as well. And when you stand near the falls and look back behind you, you can take in that view of the bridge. And then on a micro scale, just everywhere you look are all these little mossy cascades babbling back at you. Whenever we're in the woods, Henry and I like to play What's in the Hole? And he's never fails to discover some sort of crevice, and hopefully I keep him from sticking his arm all the way into it. But this was one that we found, and he pointed it out to me, and we went a little closer and checked it out. It didn't seem to be occupied right now. There weren't signs of a lot of entry and exit from it recently, but could very well have been a porcupine den or other animal den at some point in the past. You can also, if you're a little bit more adventurous, you can scramble up above the falls and look down over this kind of magical grotto. And that's one of Henry's favorite things to do. So we climbed up and got right up at the top of the falls, and were able to look down on Mom and the stream below. And that's my dog, Addie. On the other side of the little grotto where the falls are is a pretty high cliff opposite the falls, and so we climbed up above and visited some of Henry's favorite spots. This rock to look down on, and this tree that he found totally on its own. I think it's probably a black birch that at some point had blown over, and a side branch took over at two of them, in fact, at right angles to the original trunk, and are cantilevered like this, but seem to be growing in a pretty healthy way to make this natural bench. Again, I love at the falls or really anywhere in the forest to not only look at the large scale stuff, but also look at the small scale stuff. So this common polypody or rock polypody or rock fern, many names for the same species of fern, grows on the mossy rocks all around here, and it's fun to look at up close. A little starflower plant as well growing out of the moss. And after you've spent a good amount of time, it's time to leave. You got to go back to your busy life. So it's back onto the bridge. But one more look upstream back at the falls, and maybe one more look down. And you have two options at this point for how to get back to your car. You can do it as a loop, which we'll do on this, or you can go back the way you came. Either is just as good. When you do look downstream, though, you see that there's this really inviting pool, and on a hot day, this is definitely a nice place to take a dip. And so we didn't do it that day, but I know people have been lately, and when you look back up, it's a really nice framed view of the bridge from that pool. So you continue on and make one look back at the bridge behind you, and then continue on your way. And the trail connects to the old White Brook Road, which is now private, no longer publicly accessible. And it goes right through the heart of our property and all the way up into Sullivan. And just by the edge there, there's this old beech tree that's been attacked by a pileated woodpecker looking for ants and other insects inside. And more nice stonework as you step out onto the old road and back down toward the place of beginning. There's an old homestead location and a cellar hole a little ways down the trail, and this fern, which is ostrich fern, is growing all around it, and it's not a typical site for ostrich fern to be, so I've always wondered why it is growing here so far away from a big floodplain like the Connecticut River Valley would be. Ostrich fern is the fern that you can harvest fiddleheads from, and they were past fiddlehead stage in this photo, but they're very thickly grown in there. And the remainder of the route follows the old road above the gate and back to the parking lot. And this is a nice alternative way to get to the falls, walking along this old road, and it's just a little bit shorter and a little bit easier for those who might be a little bit more unsteady. And you continue down, and just as a reminder of whose property this is, well, it's all our properties really. There's one of our Monadnock Conservancy signs. And that's the tour. So hope you enjoyed it. As much as I did making it, and hope you can get out there on your own sometime and see it for yourselves. Our website has a hiking page, and you can download a trail guide and map there, and it'll give you good directions to the property. And also it shows a separate trail on the Calhoun Family Forest, a green marked trail that's a longer route and connects to a separate trailhead out on Route 10 too that can make for a longer adventure. Anybody have any questions or comments?
I actually do, Ryan. That other little parking area, is that the trailhead for that other trail you just mentioned?
Yeah. So if you were headed north on Route 10 and you passed White Brook Road is just opposite the Stone Arch Bridge on Route 10 over the Ashwillet that many people will know. And continue on just a bit farther, there's a Monadnock Conservancy sign on the right before another bridge on Route 10 across the Ashwillet. And that is a separate parking area. It's an old log landing where we have a trailhead for the Green Trail. And that trail leads from that point and connects with the Porcupine Falls Trail at the trail kiosk.
That's what I was going to ask, if it did connect.
It does. It makes for a longer route if someone's so inclined to go in and out from there.
And that's pretty uphill too, correct?
It is. It's no Monadnock hike, but it is quite a bit more hilly and ups and downs.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Thanks for the tour. That was nice.
Yeah, so any other questions? Let's see. Maps at the kiosk, Antonia asked. We do have one posted at the kiosk. We have not been, we're actually trying to decide whether we want to do this, have paper maps available for taking at our trailheads. There's a couple of different schools of thought on that. Often, when we do have them there, we find them a little bit further up the trail on the ground. But then again, they can be really convenient for someone who prefers a tangible map and maybe didn't have the means of printing it out off the website or something like that. They are definitely online, yes, yep, and on our website, and can be downloaded and put on your phone or printed out on paper.
Okay.
Kathy Shillamont always can be counted on to say something about an old historical road. So Kathy, otherwise known as the Historical Society of Cheshire County, pointing out that you can walk on that road all the way to into the deep wilds of Sullivan on that road. And I'm sure you've done it, Kathy. Antonia asked, dogs on leash? Yes, and in my photos, because I was trying to take pictures, I will admit that I let my dog off a leash for a short while. We do ask though that people keep dogs on leash, but dogs are welcome if they're under control.
Ryan, Lisa was wondering the name of that cucumber that isn't a cucumber. Can you share that again?
Yeah, it's Indian cucumber root, some people call it, or just Indian cucumber. And I forget the Latin name, but that probably isn't really necessary anyway. But maybe I will. I'm just going to quickly bring up that photo again, because once you know what to look for, it is you'll start to see it everywhere. I'm gonna bring that up and show you again. Yeah, so Indian cucumber root, the leaves grow in a whorl or a circle of leaves, as you see in several different plants all growing here. In their first year of growth, there's just one flat whorl of leaves, but then in a second year, they'll send up the next level up, which is actually the flower structure, and it'll be quite a lot taller. But this kind of flat plane of the circle of leaves and a pretty tall stem will give that away.
How long is that trail altogether, the walk that you showed us?
It is altogether, that loop that I took is about a half mile.
Wow.
Yeah, it's quite short. And that was intentional. Well, it was because that's how far the falls are from the road. But we also have thought that it's valuable to have a shorter but really visually rewarding hike available in this region.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Well, that's the show, everyone. I think, Lindsay, did we have one more poll that we wanted to invite people to?
Yes,
to
please.
take?
Ryan, if you can launch it. We're really just curious to find out how you heard about the event today. So if you wouldn't mind just answering that poll quickly before you leave, we'd really appreciate it. We want to make sure that other folks are seeing our invitations to things. And, so your insight will help us determine future events and how we market them. So
I have a quick question. I
Go
have
ahead.
relatives in Western Mass who are avid hikers and they are not members of a conservancy. Could I have shared the Zoom link with them and they could have come on to see this?
Oh yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, we're pretty easy about that. We pretty much have no events or offerings that require, well, payment of any kind or membership or past support of the Conservancy.
And does Henry have a fee schedule for taking people out?
You know, he probably doesn't charge either. He's just happy to be with people and to show off what he knows.
He's adorable, really.
Yeah. One of my very favorite outdoor experiences ever was when Ryan and Henry took us to Tip and Rock. And Ryan would start to explain something and Henry would step in and take over. And Ryan was such a good dad that he let that happen.
And he still does that a lot, even at home.
Yeah.
Sensing a future event coming together here, folks.
Well, Tip and Rock is another really nice hike, a little bit more strenuous than this one, but also a lot of fun to be able to tip the rock in Swansea.
Stream of consciousness here, but maybe Henry ought to lead a kid hike.
Maybe so. We're still working on, if anybody has any tips, any parents of young kids or parents of formerly young kids, is how to get a kid to lead and also be respectful of the pace and comfort level of other people and not run ahead. You know, getting Henry to slow down and respect other people is always tricky, but hopefully he'll get it eventually.
Well, thanks again, everyone. Really
Thank
appreciate
you.
you here.
Thank
Yeah,
you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Enjoy your evenings, everyone, and we'll see
Stay
you again
cool.
soon.
Stay
Thank
cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Definitely.
Bye-bye.
Ryan, will you hang on? Oh, I lost him. Take care.